From the studios, it's election yard, and it's time to start talking about the 2026 midterm elections. We've talked about special elections. We've talked about primaries, but let's just cut right to it. Let's start talking about the midterms. And all of you want to know out there, how do we rate these races? So today, we are going to focus on the U.S. Senate because that has come a little bit more into focus. In recent weeks, we had a Texas primary, people talking a lot about the Senate race. The Democrats have a bit of an uphill battle here. The Democrats are at a 53 to 47 disadvantage in the Senate, so they would need to pick up 4 seats to flip the Senate this year. Maybe 5 if you don't trust John Fetterman, and I don't think a lot of Democrats do at this point, but that's what the math is. The Democrats would have to go through some red states to do it. So the Senate map isn't particularly easy for them, but how do we start evaluating these races? Well, what we've done, like a bunch of other websites do, we have put our ratings on each and every Senate race. So what you're going to see today, these are our preliminary ratings of the 35 U.S. Senate races happening this year. Subsequent updates will come to you on our social media pages between now and November, but this is our starting point. So we're going to take you through each state, maybe give you a little bit on each race. Some of them, frankly, are not very interesting, but the ones that are interesting will have a little bit more to say. But these, what you are going to see on the screen here, are our preliminary ratings for all of the Senate races in 2026. This is the starting point, and we start with Alabama. Now, Alabama is one of those races that is just not very interesting. So Tommy Tuberville, the incumbent, he is running for governor. The seat is open. It's particularly hard to see any Democrat winning in Alabama right now. The only Democrat who has won a statewide race in the last decade plus is Doug Jones, and he's actually running against Tuberville for governor. So we'll talk about that Alabama governor's race in a future video. As for the Senate race, really hard to see the Democrats winning it. And we don't have to go very far to get our first toss-up. And this is Alaska. So this seat is held by Dan Sullivan. And we're calling this one a toss-up because Mary Peltola, the Democrat, the former congresswoman, who won a special election a couple of years ago, had briefly been in Congress. She is running for Senate. She had her choice. She could have run for governor, and I think she might have actually been slightly favored if she had run for governor, or she could run for Senate and try to flip this seat. So what little polling there is suggests that she might actually be neck and neck with Sullivan. So for right now, we're going to call this one a toss-up. And now when it comes to toss-ups, we don't like to do a lot of them. We like to try to avoid them if we can, but I think it's still pretty early in the election cycle, so we will have a few toss-ups. But don't you worry, when election day comes, we will not have any, because we will try to allocate those over the course of the fall, and by the time we get to election day, we won't have any toss-ups. We will have an actual prediction for you in terms of the U.S. Senate and the governors and the House and whatever else you can think of. So Peltola is a good candidate in Alaska, definitely the best that they were going to come up with. And I think she's got a shot. I actually think she's got a pretty good shot. Even though Alaska is quote-unquote a red state, Peltola does seem to have some ability to win elections there. And she does seem to have some popularity. So we'll just have to see. I don't think this is a slam dunk for Sullivan by any stretch of the imagination. But it's still very early in this race. Moving to Arkansas, Tom Cotton, Republican, running for re-election. This is not a particularly interesting race. And I would actually say neither is the next one. This is Colorado. John Hickenlooper is running for re-election. Colorado has become more of a blue state. He is facing a primary. He'll win it. There are obviously Republican candidates in the race. Looking down the list of them, I'm like, okay, I haven't heard of any of these guys. So I think Hickenlooper, given that he's a senator, he's been a governor, he's been a mayor of Denver, he has been around Colorado politics for a long time. People know who he is. I think he's in a pretty secure position at this point, as is Chris Coons in Delaware. The Republicans in Delaware don't really have a bench. This is a phrase, having a bench, that you're going to hear me say several times in several different contexts. But in this context, I would say Republicans in Delaware really don't have a bench, which is to say they don't really have anyone of notoriety or anybody a reputation to run for this seat because the party is kind of decimated. The southern part of Delaware, Sussex County, like where Bethany Beach and Rehoboth Beach, that is a more red area, but it is completely dominated by Newcastle County, which is where Wilmington and all the bigger towns and cities are, with the exception of Dover, which is Kent County. And most of the big-time politicians in Delaware come from Newcastle County, so that's probably just what will continue. And by the way, Chris Coons, also from Newcastle County. So Florida, Ashley Moody is the senator here. She's running in a special election. She replaced Marco Rubio when he became Secretary of State. We're going to call this one likely Republican right now. Democrats in Florida are in a pretty bad spot. I don't really want to put this as safe yet because the Democrats do still have to go through their primary process. I don't know at this point that Moody is like a super strong candidate. I mean, if the election were held today, she'd probably win, but Ashley Moody is not a name that you hear very much. Now, her governor, Ron DeSantis, that is a name that you hear about a lot, but she doesn't really have the profile. So I think just for now, we're going to start this one out at likely Republican, not safe, but it could go there. We move now to our second toss-up. This is Jon Ossoff in Georgia. If pushed, if I had to make a choice, I'd probably put this one at tilt Democratic today, not tilt Republican. I actually do, despite rating this as a toss-up, I do think Ossoff has a relatively decent chance of getting reelected. Georgia is not as red as it used to be. Georgia may still well elect a Republican governor in 2026 while electing Ossoff to the Senate. So I think that that's entirely possible. The Republicans have a couple candidates, some congressmen and a former college football coach, which seems to be a thing in the South, people running for Senate who used to coach SEC football teams. So they got to go through their primary process. At this point, I think Ossoff would probably beat any of them. But again, like with Alaska, still too early in the process to know. Idaho, Jim Risch, the Republican running for re-election. Not an interesting race. I don't even know if the Democrats have people in office in the state at this point. Obviously, I'm joking, but not by much. And then in Illinois, so this is a rare open Senate seat here because Dick Durbin is not running for re-election. He's been in the Senate since the 90s. He is hanging him up. There is a competitive Democratic primary to replace him. Illinois has trended bluer. I wouldn't say it's the most rock-solid blue state in the country. Every now and then, Republicans do win statewide office. They had Mark Kirk as a senator in recent years, and we're not talking in this decade, but in the previous decade. They had Bruce Rauner as a governor in the prior decade. So Republicans can win at this level, but they probably won't. So we're going to put this as likely Democratic because it is an open seat, but don't be surprised once the Democratic primary has occurred and the party starts rallying around their nominee. Don't be surprised if this ends up being safe. I'm not really sure the Republican Party of Illinois at this point is much of a force, but I guess we'll find out. So Iowa, this is Joni Ernst's seat. She is not running for re-election. We have this one starting out as lean Republican. The Republicans probably going to nominate Ashley Hinson. She is a congresswoman here. The Democrats do have a competitive primary on their side. So among the names are Josh Turek and Zach Walz. So Turek is a state representative. Walz is a state senator. And we've been talking about special elections and certain things that have been happening in Iowa where we've been seeing at the local level some swings to the Democrats. We can't extrapolate that to statewide at this point, and we really have no idea if the Democrats in Iowa are on any sort of road to a comeback. We know tariffs are going to be an issue, and farms are always an issue in Iowa. And I think how the election results go in 2026 are going to kind of be a gauge on people's views of the current administration, and especially agricultural policy and certain foreign policy decisions that they've made as well, as is usually the case in Iowa. I do think that Hinson, or the Republican nominee here, we assume it's Hinson, is the presumptive favorite at this point. We'll call it lean Republican, but I don't know. There have been some political observers who think that something may be going on in Iowa, that maybe Iowa's taking a little bit of a shift to Team Blue, but I can't say for sure that I know that that's happening. We've seen things on the micro level, but the macro level, we don't know yet. So I do think the Republicans are somewhat favored in this race. So Kansas Senate race, Roger Marshall. Republicans are going to win. I think we can move on there. Now, Kentucky. Kentucky, this is only interesting in that there's a competitive Republican primary here to replace Mitch McConnell, who's been in the Senate for over 40 years, former Senate Majority Leader. He's hanging him up for good. He will probably be replaced by a Republican. There is quite a brutal Republican primary going on right now to replace him, but you would think that in a state like Kentucky, that the Republican nominee would be a significant favorite. The only Democrat in the state who I think could have even potentially made this a race is named Andy Beshear. He had no interest in running for this. I think he may have his sights set on something a little bigger after he leaves office, but we'll just have to see on that. But as for right now, the Kentucky Senate race, interesting primary, not an interesting general. Now, Louisiana is interesting. Now, you may say, safe Republican, how could this possibly be interesting? Well, Bill Cassidy is the senator here. He has pissed off Donald Trump sometimes. And Donald Trump endorsed Congresswoman Julia Letlow to run against him. And she is. So you could see a situation in which both Cassidy and Letlow make a runoff together. So you got two Republicans running against each other. Maybe a Democrat, if they're able to consolidate their vote, maybe a Democrat sneaks into the runoff. Just a matter of which Republican comes out first. With Trump's endorsement there, that does make things more challenging for Cassidy. At the end of the day, I think a Republican's going to win this seat. It's just a matter of which one. But it's going to be kind of a messy race, I think. Now, Maine. This is where we get to our third toss-up. This is Susan Collins. Susan Collins has been in the Senate since 1996. Democrats have really wanted to beat her. Democrats really thought they were going to beat her. In 2020, with Sarah Gideon as the nominee, they did not. This is, I think, the Democrats' last chance to beat her. If they don't beat her this year in what could be a Democratic year, then they're not going to beat her. And who knows if she's even going to run again in 6 years. She's been in the Senate for a long time. She's getting up there in years. So the Democrats, as you may know, they got a primary. It is quite a spicy one, I think. On one side, you got Janet Mills. She is the incumbent governor of Maine, has said she would probably only serve one term, given that she's in her late 70s. On the other side, you've got Graham Plattner, who is a working class guy who has started getting involved in progressive politics, had the whole tattoo issue, and still leads in the Democratic primary polls and might actually run fairly well against Susan Collins. Some polling I saw suggests that he would run better than the incumbent governor of Maine. So who knows if the polls can be believed, but one thing is for sure, the Democrats really, really want to win this race. So we are going to start out with this one at a toss-up. Massachusetts, Ed Markey, he avoided a primary challenge. It would have been Ayanna Pressley, who was rumored to run against him. She isn't. The Democrats are not going to lose this Senate seat in Mass. Scott Brown ain't walking through that door, so Ed Markey is on his way. But then we get to our next toss-up, and this one is Michigan. So Gary Peters is the Democrat. He is not running for re-election. There are a few Democrats in the race. One of them is a congresswoman. One of them is a state senator. There are a few others in the race. And then on the Republican side, probably going to be Mike Rogers, a former congressman who ran against Alyssa Slotkin in 2024 and barely lost that election. So he'll probably be the Republican nominee. We'll have to see who comes out on the Democratic side. Michigan, it's blue-ish, I would say. It definitely voted for Donald Trump a few times. That's undeniable. Michigan may elect a Republican governor this year. We don't really know yet, but we will talk about that in a future video. I would think that this is like a 51-49 or a 52-48 kind of race. So let's start with this one as a toss-up. if you made me pick, I'd say the Democrats probably hang on to this one by their fingernails, but these Senate races are not as easy for the Democrats as they used to be. Like when they had Carl Levin and Debbie Stabenow, both of them were winning fairly comfortably. It's not really like that anymore. Democrats have to work hard to hold their Senate seats in Michigan. This probably will be no exception. So Minnesota, we move on to this one. Tina Smith, the Democrat, she is not running for re-election. So we have this one starting at likely Democratic. There is a Democratic primary. You got Congresswoman Angie Craig. You've got Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan running. I think either of them would be the favorite in the general election. The Republicans really don't have a deep bench on their side. They have candidates running, but nobody that's really, I think, got the cachet of the Democrats who were in the race. And, of course, things in Minnesota have definitely been pretty volatile in recent months. You would think that it could potentially benefit the Democrats. A little too soon to say because the midterm election is 8 months away at the time we recorded this. But I think the Democrats are probably going to be favored in the big Minnesota races this year, and this is no exception. And for the record, had Tina Smith run for re-election, we would have also had this one at likely Democratic to start. So one that is safe is Mississippi, Cindy Hyde-Smith. The Democratic Party on a statewide level in Mississippi is pretty much non-existent. And in Montana, so Steve Daines announced on the day that candidate filing closed that he was not going to run for re-election. He got his preferred candidate in there right under the wire. So no big name Democrat filed for this race. So this probably will be a Republican hold. So now we have Nebraska starting at likely Republican. So this is Pete Ricketts, former governor, now a senator, running for another term in the Senate. He is not facing a Democrat. He is going to be running against Dan Osborne, an independent. You may remember that he ran against Deb Fischer back in 2024, actually ran a fairly competitive race in what turned out to be a more Republican year than maybe people thought it was going to be. But he kept the race into the single digits, so he's going to try again, is hoping the fact that maybe this will be a bluer year and Democrats probably going to flip a House seat in Nebraska. You know, maybe he could do even better than he did against Deb Fischer. At this point, though, Nebraska is still a pretty red state, so I think likely Republican is a good place to start. I actually wouldn't be surprised to see this move more like lean Republican at some point, or who knows, we'll just have to see the polls. Maybe it can get closer, but we're starting this one at likely. So New Hampshire, Jeanne Shaheen, the incumbent Democrat who is a former governor. She is not running for re-election. She's hanging him up. Democrats are going to most likely go with Chris Pappas as their nominee. The Republicans could go with either John Sununu, a former senator, or Scott Brown, a former senator just from another state. So New Hampshire, I would say it's bluer than it isn't. New Hampshire does have a Republican governor. They've had a Republican governor for a while now. They went from Chris Sununu to Kelly Ayotte. New Hampshire, once upon a time, used to have 2 Republican senators. Probably in your lifetime, if you're watching this and you're as old as I am, and I'm not going to tell you how old I am. You can probably guess. But they had 2 Republican senators. Now they have 2 Democrats. They've had 2 Democrats for a decade now. So this is where New Hampshire is at this point. New Hampshire is bluer than it isn't. It's not a solid blue state, but it's bluish, blue enough. I think Pappas as the nominee would probably win, but we're only going to call it lean Democratic right now because, I don't know, anything can happen. And Sununu is a brand name in Republican politics, and I'm assuming that it's going to be Sununu as opposed to Scott Brown. Sununu used to hold this seat once upon a time. So he's trying to make a comeback, and, you know, you can never count on a Sununu in New Hampshire, but I think the Democrats probably a little more favored, but we will have to see. So safe Democrat, Cory Booker in New Jersey. Really nothing to talk about here. And now New Mexico. New Mexico's safe Democratic. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, you know, New Mexico's blue, but it's not that blue. So why isn't it likely Democratic? Well, the Republicans aren't even running a candidate here. So I think Ben Ray Lujan is in pretty good shape. And now we move to North Carolina, and you're going to see something on the screen that you have not seen yet. And that is a gain. So North Carolina, the primaries have occurred. Tom Tillis, the incumbent Republican, is not running for re-election. The Republican running in this race is the state GOP chair, national GOP chair, Michael Whatley. He is running against Roy Cooper, the former Democratic governor of North Carolina, who only just left office within the last year and a half. Cooper, I think, should be considered the favorite in this race, even just a slight favorite. So we have this as tilt Democratic, but I think this is Cooper's race to lose. I think Cooper has a much bigger profile than Whatley. I think Cooper left office with some measure of popularity. And I think if the Democrats don't win this seat, then there's not a Democrat alive in the entire great state of North Carolina that was going to win it. Nobody alive if Roy Cooper doesn't win this race. So Cooper, I think, should be considered a slight favorite at this point. North Carolina, not really a blue favorable state, although they did fairly well at the statewide level in 2024, other than the presidential race. Another factor in that was that the gubernatorial campaign really just dragged down the GOP ticket. But other than that, I do think that this is an eminently winnable race in North Carolina, and they're probably not going to get a better opportunity than what they have in front of them right now. So Ohio, we have this one starting at tilt Republican. And now this may be a bit of a surprise considering that Ohio in the last decade has really trended much redder. Here's the thing though. You got John Husted running in a special election. He was appointed to replace J.D. Vance. He is running against Sherrod Brown, the former senator who got knocked off in 2024, and all things considered, actually ran a pretty respectable race, despite the fact that Ohio is trending redder, and you had an Ohio guy literally on the ticket, at the top of the ticket for president and vice president. Sherrod Brown's probably the best candidate they could have fielded here, so the Democrats got their guy. I think he can make it respectably close. I don't know that I'm ready to call this a toss-up. I think just given how things have been going in Ohio, I think you'd want to consider Husted some level of a favorite, but I do think that Brown has a shot. So we are starting this one tilt Republican. So Oklahoma, this is going to be safe Republican. Now we have a TBD on the screen because Mark Wayne Mullen is the senator. Mark Wayne Mullen might very well be resigning in the near future to join Donald Trump's cabinet. That is still TBD, probably going to happen. So we don't actually know if that is what takes place. We don't know who the senator is going to be on election day in 2026. There are some names that are out there, but until somebody gets appointed, well, first Mullen has to resign, but then until somebody gets appointed, we don't know who it's going to be. But whomever that Republican individual is, they're going to get reelected because it's Oklahoma. Now, Oregon, Jeff Merkley, the Democrat running for reelection. Republicans don't really contend in Senate races in this state right now, so really just difficult to picture Merkley losing, as it is equally difficult to picture Jack Reed losing in Rhode Island. He's been in the Senate for about 30 years now. Rhode Island is a pretty blue state. Again, going to talk about benches. The Republicans don't have a bench in Rhode Island. The bench they had was Alan Fung. It was a former mayor who every higher office he ran for, he lost, even though Republicans were confident that he could win. He did not. So other than that, they got nobody in Rhode Island. Now, South Carolina, Lindsey Graham. We're going to start this one at likely Republican. Now, Democrats don't really win elections in South Carolina at this point. With that said, I also don't know how popular Lindsey Graham actually is. So I think any Democrat, and who knows who's going to emerge there, but any Democrat might be appealing to some people who got an axe to grind against Lindsey Graham. And considering the fact in 2020, he actually didn't win by all that much. So Lindsey Graham only won that race in 2020 by about 10 points, I'd want to say, which is still a solid win. But you would think that in a place like South Carolina that maybe he'd win by more. It wasn't quite a blowout like you'd see in like Utah or Idaho or Wyoming or a place like that. Still a win, but not as big of a win as maybe you would think. So I think likely Republican's a good place to start. This may go to safe at some point, but let's start it likely. So we won't talk about South Dakota very long. South Dakota used to have 2 Democratic senators. That was a long time ago. Now they got 2 Republican senators, probably going to remain that way for the foreseeable future. The same goes for Tennessee, where you've got Bill Hagerty running for re-election. Can't really see any Democrat making any waves in this race. But now let's start with an interesting one. It's been a long time since we've talked about Texas as a quote-unquote interesting race. But we're starting Texas at tilt Republican. So John Cornyn, the Republican, he's running for re-election. At the time we recorded this video, he is in the middle of a runoff campaign against the state's attorney general, Ken Paxton. Paxton may very well win that runoff. And not only that, opinion polling suggests that even if Trump endorsed Cornyn, that Paxton still might win anyway. So Paxton, opinion polling so far, has also shown that he might be the weaker candidate statewide in November against the Democrat James Tallarico. So this one could potentially get very interesting. Now, if Cornyn somehow gets the nomination, which right now it looks a little more unlikely, but if Cornyn gets the nomination, does not get successfully primaried here by Paxton, maybe Cornyn would have a better chance of winning the general election. I still think it could be close either way, but the Republicans might nominate the more Trumpy kind of candidate, I guess you could say, but have a worse chance of winning the general election. Now, we have this as tilt Republican, so clearly we think that whomever emerges on the Republican side is probably going to be a favorite, if only a slight favorite. But I got to tell you, I think Tallarico actually does have a shot here. So you could tell in the last Senate race that Colin Allred was losing momentum. And then you think back to like 2018 against Ted Cruz with Beto O'Rourke. It was closer than I thought it was going to be, but I never really expected Beto O'Rourke to win. Tallarico, I think, actually could. We're starting this at tilt Republican, but I think Tallarico could very well make this race interesting, but a lot depends on who the Republicans nominate here. So in Virginia, Mark Warner running for re-election, former governor, now a senator. We have this safe Democratic. So this website, this channel, this brand is based out of the Commonwealth of Virginia, and I had to look up who is running on the Republican side, and when I looked, I didn't recognize a single name there. Maybe Glenn Youngkin could have made it interesting if he were willing to run, which he apparently is not. And frankly, I think he would much rather be president than a senator. I think Warner would have been tough to beat by any Republican. Even if they had gotten a bigger name in this race, I still think Warner would have been tough to beat. So Warner, I think, is in pretty good shape. As are the last two we're going to talk about. Shelley Moore Capito in West Virginia. West Virginia took a 180-degree turn, went from a solid blue state to a solid red state, probably in my lifetime. So I think she is home free. And now in Wyoming, Cynthia Lummis, the senator, she is retiring. Harriet Hagman, the congresswoman, is running for the seat. She is almost certainly going to win because Democrats don't really win in Wyoming anymore. And frankly, I don't even know if there are Democrats in Wyoming at this point. I know there are a few of you, but just a few. So those are the initial ratings of the 35 U.S. Senate races. These are subject to change between now and November. And to see what changes we make, stick around at Election Yard. Like and subscribe. Follow us on social media. We'll see you soon.